Well, it's that time of year again. We're coming up to the European elections, the elections for the European Parliament, which takes place across the whole of the European Union, 27 different nations. Of course, the 28th, Britain, is not participating this year. So it's a break in our political cycle. Thank God. But it takes me back to 2014, which is 5 years ago. The last European elections, was something dramatic happened in this country. For the first time since the Great War, World War I, another party topped a national poll besides Labour and the Conservatives, and that was UKIP. UKIP won the 2014 European elections. It was a political earthquake, and it was a statement from the British people that they were fed up of the European Union, that they wanted out, because they'd elected into power, into the European Parliament, MEPs who were simply campaigning to leave that body and to leave the Federal Republic of Europe as it's becoming. Now, after that 2014 breakthrough, UKIP continued into 2015, winning parliamentary by-elections, massively increasing the number of local councillors. They were a party on the move. It was dramatic, the impact that Nigel Farage had as their leader. He galvanised a real force in British politics for change. And Tories came on board, and some people from the left joined, and it was a real bandwagon for change. And there was a fear in the Conservative Party, Labour Party, the two established parties, that as the general election approached in 2015, UKIP were going to make a dramatic breakthrough. They needed between 5 and 6 million votes to get a number of seats in Parliament. I mean, up to 100 seats, effectively. And with that fear in mind, David Cameron eventually decided to offer the British people a referendum on the whole issue of Europe. Do you want to stay in the European Union? Yes or no?
This is a huge decision for our country, perhaps the biggest we'll make in our lifetimes. And it will be the final decision. So to those who suggest that a decision in the referendum to leave would merely produce another stronger renegotiation and then a second referendum in which Britain could stay, I say, think again. The renegotiation is happening right now, and the referendum that follows will be a once-in-a-generation choice, an in or out referendum. When the British people speak, their voice will be respected, not ignored. If we vote to leave, then we will leave.
And it dramatically changed the political landscape, because millions of people, I think maybe 2 million people who would have voted UKIP, went back to the Tories in the hope of getting this referendum. And there was also a fear in the 2015 general election that there would be an SNP Labour coalition government, and that terrified a lot of English people into voting for the Conservatives, for the status quo. And Cameron had offered this referendum basically against the advice of the leading players in the Conservative Party, such as George Osborne, who realised the risk involved. But he said he believed at the time that the Conservatives would not get an absolute majority, and that they would still have to rely on the Liberal Democrats to form a coalition. And the Liberal Democrats, therefore, would snuff off any chance of a referendum on Europe. That was his get-out-of-jail card. But the Conservatives did win an absolute majority, a working majority, I think it was 19 or 20 seats. And he had to fulfil his promise to hold a referendum. And we know in 2016, the referendum took place. And the momentum to leave was quite powerful. I mean, despite the fact the Leave campaign was outspent 4-1, and that all the established parties in the government backed the Remain campaign, the Leave campaign was on its way to a healthy victory. And then we saw the death of Joe Cox. The whole campaign was sort of stalled for a time. But the Leave campaign was strong enough to weather that tragic event and to go on and win the referendum by 1.4 million votes. A very significant victory. I mean, it's only 4 percentage points, but it's a margin. I mean, if they'd have won by 1, they'd have had the mandate to go and leave the European Union. To win by 1.4 million meant that the British people have voted to leave. And the government had to put that into practice. Of course, Cameron went. May came in. Brexit means Brexit. And eventually Article 50 was triggered. But what the British people had done here is they'd put a spike in the wheel of globalism, which the whole world recognised. We'd seen the rise of the People's Army, as it was called, the Purple Army, UKIP, and the Leave campaign, and the power of mobilising the people at grassroots level. There was a dissatisfaction with the whole globalist agenda of open borders, mass, what became effectively uncontrolled immigration from the third world. These issues were being raised, and people were dissatisfied with what was happening with the constant export of jobs, companies sending manufacturing out to the third world, and people simply being dumped in Britain and Europe. And they felt like the government should intervene and stop this process and encourage manufacturing to remain in our nations. And of course, this whole sort of globalist agenda was seriously starting to undermine our national identity and our sense of who we were. There were alien religions building up power bases in our country. 1,800 major public mosques had been built. Britain was going through a cultural transformation without the consent of the British people. And it was not what the British people desired. The British people wanted their government to put Britain first, British culture first, the British people first. The government was failing to do this, mainly because they were simply become the puppets of the European Union. The European Union was dictating the whole political agenda in Britain as it was in the other member states. So we voted to leave. And this, as I say, sent shockwaves around the world, not least in the United States, where a certain Donald Trump had began to campaign for the Republican nomination to stand for President of America, and was doing well. And he was sort of encouraged by what happened in Britain. It was a real shot in the arm for him to see people power, how effective it could be, even if it came up against the establishment. And of course, Nigel Farage went over and helped out on the Trump campaign. And Trump mobilised his own People's Army. He used the rhetoric, he used the strategies that had been employed by UKIP in Britain to actually win the presidency of America against all the odds, against the figure favoured by the establishment. Again, Hillary Clinton massively outspent Trump, and she was favoured to win it. But Trump, just as we had done in Britain with the Leave campaign, he set the apple cart, and he won against the odds. And the establishment in America, like the establishment in Britain, regarded this as sort of a disturbance of the status quo, but an exceptional moment. Something which was really a flash in the pan, which could be reversed. But it wasn't a flash in the pan, and it couldn't be reversed. Because there were fundamentals driving this popular revolt, which had to be addressed. The people had had enough of globalism. They'd had enough of seeing their countries, their nation states, made subsidiary, secondary to globalist institutions such as the EU, the United Nations, the World Bank, all the corporations, this whole globalist agenda, this one world agenda. People wanted their states to protect them, to protect their lives and their culture and their borders and their jobs, not simply to give everything away to some sort of dubious international order. So once Trump got elected, the waves continued around the world, the shock waves. And we've seen in Latin America, country after country, Peru, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, most recently Bolsonaro in Brazil, a lot of Central American countries like Guatemala and El Salvador, have kicked out the leftist governments that were elected during what was called the pink wave in Latin America 20 years ago, and have elected into power nationalist, populist politicians, people who can align themselves with Donald Trump. So the national populist rebellion, or revolution if you like, spread to Latin America. And of course in Eastern Europe we had the whole national awakenings. We saw the Vladimir Putin reinvigorating the Russian church and the Russian nation, Russian nationalism becoming very strong. We saw in Poland the reawakening of Catholicism and a Polish nationalism. The same in Hungary with Viktor Orban and the assertion of a Christian nationalism there. This was against the globalist agenda, the secularism, the godlessness, the nationlessness of globalism. People want an identity. They want to belong. They wanted that to be secured by their governments. And it also started to move into northwestern Europe, into France. And we saw the campaign of Marine Le Pen in 2017 for the French presidency. She got into the runoff, but she lost. Geert Wilders in Holland, he again shook the apple cart, but he lost. And people were saying, well, maybe this nationalist wave is going to subside. Not at all. It had already moved on into Austria with the Austrian Freedom Party and Sebastian Kurz. For the Conservatives in Austria, moved over to the right, the populist right. And then, of course, in Italy, the emergence of Salvini. And a utter transformation of Italian politics. Don't forget, Italian politics for a decade had been dominated by the democratic socialists, who would open the borders and have basically invited hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Africans into Italy. And Salvini and the Italian people said, oh, we've had enough of this. And they reasserted their national identity. Salvini has vigorously strengthened the Italian borders. His party, La Liga, has become the dominant force in Italy at every level of government and will do so at the European level in May. And we've seen nationalism move into Western Europe. And in Spain, we've seen the rise of a party called Vox, led by Santiago Abascal. The nationalist wave is not subsiding. It's not going to go away. And it's moving in to Northwest Europe. It's coming back into France with the Gilets Jaunes, the Yellow Vest movement, and the re-emergence of Marine Le Pen. It's coming into Germany with the AfD. Don't forget they won 14% in the German election and really dealt Angela Merkel a mortal blow. I mean, it's a slow death. She's dying, but she's bleeding to death. And so we're faced with this question. Whither Britain? What's the future for Britain in all this? When is the nationalist wave going to crash on our shores? When are we going to... We who sparked this all off in 2014 with the UKIP vote and then the referendum. We who created the momentum for this national populism, which is now spread right across the globe, from the Philippines to, to Colombia. It's everywhere. National populism is the political ideology of the moment. The reassertion of the nation state, the emergence of strongmen as leaders, the reassertion of national identity and economic nationalism, the government taking responsibility for the economy and not conceding everything to globalist institutions, and the rejection of the Soros view of open borders and statelessness and one world governed by the United Nations. Now, we don't want that, because we've seen the consequences of that. We've seen it mean a third world invasion of the West and the colonization of our countries and our welfare states. They suck away our money and sort of invade and take our territory. We don't want that. We want our nations to reassert themselves. And we want that in Britain as well. But is there now a political force in Britain capable of doing that? I mean, Nigel Farage has left UKIP, and UKIP has become a sort of libertarian party. We need a patriotic party. We need a self-assertive nationalist party that fights for the British nation, that glories in our past, that glories in our identity and our culture. We're seeing the emergence of a party called For Britain, led by Anne-Marie Waters. And I'm very impressed the way that's developed. It's developed an organisational structure, and it's going to compete in these May elections right across the country. It could be the party of the future. Britain First has been hammered by the state. Street activism has been severely curtailed. But it still stands for an ideology of Christian nationalism, which is the core ideology of national populism. Because it's not just awakening and an awakening of national identity, it's also an awakening of spiritual identity. We don't want our countries to become Islamic republics. We are proud of our Christian heritage. We're disappointed in the church. We're glad to see that Pope Francis has been effectively defrocked by the Catholic Church now, because he's been an embarrassment as the pontiff. We need leaders that assert our Christian identity, that assert our Christian values. We need to reinvigorate the family. We need to have more children again. I'm really happy to see Viktor Orban offering incentives for Hungarian women to have larger families and Hungarian people, you know, to form families and to have 2, 3, 4, 5 children. The same is happening in Poland. The same is happening in Russia. We've got to reverse the population decline that was brought about by mass abortion, the use of contraception, and the promotion of sexual perversion. We've got to reverse that in the West, because we do have an enemy that's trying to encroach upon us, that's trying to take our land and our territory, an enemy which is coming in from the Middle East, which is being supported by these globalist governments. That's their greatest betrayal. They betrayed our culture and our way of life. Not only have they pushed out our manufacturing and changed the whole nation of our societies, they betrayed us. They talked about diversity as strength. Diversity is destruction. It means the end of something and the promotion of something else. We don't want to live in diverse societies. We want to live in European, Christian, traditional societies that give us security and give us strength. And we need a political force which will speak out for that. For Britain, maybe it. Maybe UKIP under Gerald Batten, but I'm not convinced because it's too libertarian. It needs to become patriotic. But we really need to address this issue now. What is the vehicle that's going to save Britain? Which party? Is Nigel Farage come back into play with his Brexit party? We'll wait and see. But I've got a feeling now is the time to really put our weight behind one political force, to find a vehicle to save Britain, to save our nation. We started off this whole process of hostility and rejection of globalism. Now it's the time to reassert British nationalism. Thank you for watching this video. We're putting out messages as often as we can now to stir up the people of this nation and the people of the West to fight back on behalf of their nations, to have confidence that we can win. We're trying to buy new equipment. We want to buy a small camera so that we can film outside, and we want to buy some radio mics so we can get good sound quality outside. So we're looking for funds really to promote this work that we're doing. So if you support us and you want to invest in this battle to save our nation, there's a PayPal link in the description. If you can, please make a donation. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Ring the bell as well so you get a notification of any future videos we make. We're turning out 2, 3, 4 videos a week now, and we're going to keep on this battle until we win. Thank you.